And so our goals for tonight are to just briefly tee up our conversation for next month, which will be just to make some technical tweaks to our graduation policy, because we've been kind of waterfalling these graduation years as we've moved our proficiency-based expectation in. So I think we have one more year of that to complete. So I was just going to give you some quick context on that so you know what to expect next month. But then really the bulk of our time this evening will be focused on more in like a workshopping mode, conversation about how to talk about the changes we are making as it relates to curriculum and instruction in the district. And just recognizing that we need to be really thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about how to bring our families and community along with this change and evolution. And so we have some things to tee up the discussion, but see this meeting as truly like everybody rolls up our sleeves and thinks about both messages and methods for how we want to approach that. And so that's why Grace is here and why Adam had mentioned we'd invited folks from the Public Affairs Committee in case they could join, because it really is the kind of intersection between that committee's work and our committee's work. Hi, Mickey. Welcome. So that's really where our focus is tonight. So the outcome from that, I don't think will be sort of a tied up with a nice bow type outcome, but it will be more that we come up with the next steps. Like, okay, so given everything that came out of the conversation, what do we think are the right next moves in the short term, long term? So any questions on that or anything you want to add, Adam? Okay. Cool. Great. Well, then do you want to do the formality, Adam, of meeting minutes?
Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 9th?
So move.
Second. Okay. Any questions to the motion?
No.
Any public comment on the motion?
That's why.
Any board comment on the motion? And would you please indicate your approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Unanimous. There we go. Formality dealt with.
Thank you. And thanks to Lindsay for taking minutes so thoroughly. I know that's been feedback from our committee in the past that we haven't had that. So thank you for tending to that and being so thorough with that as well.
They are excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to do is this graduation piece. So I have to tell you all that I looked into board docs, and when I went there, the latest revision to the graduation policy I saw was 2017 or 18. And so I have a question into Ann Rothaker about that. When we were doing these updates, is this a... Okay. The Janet was posting updates for us. So I'm just fully transparent sharing with you that I can't ask Janet, did I send you the final one, or, what happened with that? So I guess the bottom line is what we have up there right now was from, I think, 2 years ago. But what I'm about to show you is the work we did most recently for the next draft, which I think should be the version that's up there. So either way, let's work from the latest I have for the sort of minor tweaks that we'll make next month. And so I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Lindsay, can you let me share my screen? And give you a little bit of context. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So, great. So this is what we looked at as far as I can remember most recently. And so you'll see that we had this last year, this was 2019, 2020, with the traditional credit bearing diploma. And this is just sort of old language. And then we did some streamlining. And then we started beginning with the 2020-2021 school year, and we get into the existing expectations we have for current seniors that they're going to graduate this way. So basically what we're going to need to do is just erase this top section. It's going to be that basic. And then most likely adopt the rest of what's in here as it is. At the time, just for a little bit of framing, we did talk about a few things that, we were not really changing the policy, that it was really about just carrying forward the proficiency-based expectations. But we talked about a few kind of specific, like whys behind the proficiency diploma and specific tweaks we made in the rationale for them. So I'll share this with you all. It's up in board docs as pre-read for next time, but I just wanted to highlight it because I think we can have an efficient conversation next month if you guys check that out in advance. But that's really it. I'm just trying to be a little bit more ahead of the game for the backward plan that Adam helped us build, so you all know what to expect, and so that we hopefully can do that and be ready to vote it up to the full board so we can bring it to the board right away without too many ideally just one committee meeting on it, unless other big things come up for you all.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the graduation, the 2021 will be applicable, even though we had a special year for the under the pandemic, but that's the same outline. Those are the same criteria will be applied for the graduation process for this year too?
Yes, but we have talked about, some practice tweaks that might make sense in order to help students meet those requirements. So, one, we're doing kind of standards recovery work at the high school level, plus kind of standards/credit recovery this summer. Mm-hmm. There were conversations about capstone projects and adjustments to that. There are a couple additional ways students can earn elective credits or elective ups, if you will, that are connected to work that they're doing in childcare, things that were relevant in our current context. So things like that have been considered this year because of the context, but the broad parameters of the policy are applying. We aren't saying you don't need to get as many units of proficiency or you don't have to master standards, and we didn't make any of those modifications.
Okay. All right. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Roberto?
Yeah.
Thanks. Melia, are any of the cross-reference policies also going to need updating, or are we only going to talk about IKF?
We were only planning to talk about IKF, but if you have feedback on any of the others you'd want to talk about, we could. What I'll share next meeting is I do see a couple places in our policy that are more substantive that we might want to take up for conversation next year. I don't think this spring is the time to do that. An example is connected to language. And people have brought up two things. One, the fact that we don't have a language requirement, and in terms of having, a world language requirement. And two, the fact that there isn't anything that speaks to English proficiency, and just wonderings about that based on case studies we've looked at recently of students who are graduating as juniors in terms of having, quote, credits, but who can't mainstream into a general class in our district because they don't have enough English. But then they're getting into SMCC and they can't access our kind of core classes, but then they're getting in and, having to pay for SMCC classes. So there's does that make sense? And so there's things like that that are bubbling up that I would love for us to take on and look at more closely, but not this spring, just given everything.
Right. Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. I guess more acutely, are any of the changes that we're going to make on IKF going to require any immediate changes to the reference policies? Just maybe we can check on that. And maybe that's part of when we do our legal check at the end, that happens.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like the more of the substantive changes to those other policies that could happen down the road when we can spend the time and give it the attention that it requires.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lindsay, if you can make a note of that, just scanning them, I think we're fine, but I will bring that perspective to our meeting in whatever May, I guess that will be. Great. Anything else on that? Just so it's more of like a preview for what's to come, but trying to be better about preparing in advance. Okay. Well, ready to dive into the meat of it? Great. So I do have a little bit of a framing thing I'm going to share here in the form of PowerPoint, which what's a Zoom meeting without a PowerPoint? But really this would be, oh, that's my dog. Sorry. This will be more of an informal kind of all of us kind of working together. So I'm excited for that, just for Jesse and Carly and ultimately Fiona and Tracy to get to do that with you all as board members. But just to put some context to it. So yeah, our aim here is to brainstorm strategies for communicating the changes on our curriculum and instruction that are aligned with our equity goal with families in the community. So that's kind of the big thing we're trying to work on. I will get rid of the dog in a second if that keeps happening. The background materials that I wanted to point out that after I finish this framing, maybe we'll take 5 minutes for just quiet skimming, are the beliefs and core practices. I think this would be familiar to everybody. We've talked about the beliefs before. Okay, I apologize. Hold on 1 second. Okay. That's a good reminder for if we're having a full board meeting usually I'm just making sure the children are, full of treats and video games as my bribe so that they don't interrupt, but the dog is a new twist. So beliefs and core practices, those were developed the first year I was here because we were doing proficiency work and it was really focused on technical issues around grading policies and all of this kind of technical work that teachers were grappling with. And we really wanted to take a step back and come back to the point of it all, which is why are we even doing proficiency? Like why all this technical change? And it's rooted in our equity work. And we wanted more for the focus of our cross-district efforts to be thinking about, well, what do we believe about great teaching and learning? And what are the kinds of teaching practices that would be enduring and things we want to support across schools, no matter their model and no matter their grade span. So that's one of the things we'll look at. The next thing are the content area visions. I think you've heard us talk about our vertical teams. We've heard from Brooke with the science and Fiona with social studies and Tracy, Carly, and Jesse with math. So this is where we started to move from just graduation standards to looking more deeply at within the content areas, what are we trying to do in terms of our pedagogy, in terms of the teaching practices, as well as the content. And so each of these you'll see have kind of some guiding principles and beliefs to them, as well as then some evidence or research-based practices that we're trying to promote and support. And then we didn't attach, but I can share, if it's helpful as we get further into this, a few sample emails from parents that start to illuminate some of, in this case, pushback we're getting on some of the moves that we're making in terms of curriculum and instruction that we see as aligned with our equity work. And so we thought that could be helpful fodder for our conversation as we think about what do people need to hear and how do we help bring people along with the why and the what. So it's just highlighting that. The next thing I wanted to share as some grounding context is really, again, the why. So we're talking about some changes and evolution to the way we think about curriculum instruction in Portland. And so the question would be why? Why not just do what we're doing forevermore? Like, what's the point of changing, or why do we feel like we need to make some of these moves? And so the first place I wanted to point our collective attention to is what's currently now drafted in the equity policy. So when we worked on this last month, you may recall that the curriculum section was the least kind of refined. It had like a whole bunch of stuff because our curriculum team was going to do some work on it. So since we met last month, we've done a little bit of revision to it, and you'll see that it's reflected here. And so this kind of expression of what we're trying to do within curriculum instruction in alignment with our equity goal speaks to then some of the concrete moves we're making and the changes we're trying to facilitate. So I'll be quiet and give you guys a minute or two to read this, just so you have some grounding here, because this is new language for you. And just give me a quick all good when you're ready. I can't see everybody right now, from board members, I guess, in particular.
It's thick and juicy. I'll take as much time as you give me to keep reading it, but I'm also good.
I'm good. So I have a couple of just quick questions / comments.
Yeah. So if you, and I would say that this, we can decide if we want to get into this language and start to tune this further, because we didn't have the opportunity. So maybe, we can stick on this for a few minutes and then come back to it if you guys want. But go ahead, Roberto.
Yeah, and I not so much I don't intend to change the language, but just to clarify. So on the points down at the bottom, the last 5 points, what does it mean? Like when we say integrate language principles into all curriculum and instructions, can you just briefly explain what that means? How do we integrate language principles into all curriculums and instruction? I know that that's a probably sounds like it's a loaded question, but.
No. I mean, I can give a brief explanation, and then people from the academic team definitely chime in as well. But this is part of our allow plan. And this is where we have this expectation that the high leverage principles in terms of developing language are integrated into core curriculum. So this is speaking to the fact that rather than to take kids who are English language learners and put them aside and teach them differently, that we include them in the classroom. And part of how we do that is by using the language principles that are research-based around how to create access. So this is creating scaffolds. It's about how we give students access to, vocabulary so they have an understanding and can access the material when they're reading a book and our text with their peers. In math, Carly or Tracy or JC, can one of you give like one concrete example of this in math?
Sure, I can.
Thanks, Carly.
So there are math language routines that come from Stanford University that are in our curriculum. And so one that we use a lot is called 3 reads. And so it has students we have one student read the problem aloud and you just talk about the context. And then you have someone else read it aloud and you talk about numbers. And then another person reads it aloud and you talk about what you might do to go solve the problem. And so it kind of holds more than one purpose, but it builds up that language. It builds up that habit for students when they're going to solve on their own. And it helps them with math skills, obviously. So there's I think there's 12 of them. Is that right, Jesse?
That sounds about right. Yeah, and I think that's a great example because I think it shows that it certainly supports our students who are English language learners, but it's also good instruction. It's like what you would do, and it supports all learners.
Thanks. Great, thank you. That's really helpful, and that's a great example. And we have talked about some of this as part of when we talk about the Lao plan. Yeah, so I appreciate reminding us of that. And then the other part that I wanted to say, by the way, when I read this, I should have started with this. When I read this, I like the direction of it, right? Like I like the vision that we're expressing here, and it's pretty much the conversations that we've had all along. So this is very much in line with the greater with our overarching goals. So the other points, when we started to talk about curriculum, I often you hear, especially from us that hear from constituents and families, the conversations eventually lead to what sounds like piecemealing curriculum, right? Like, oh, they didn't teach me this when I was in school, and they should teach this to the kids now. And these little excerpts of like probably, especially when we talk about history and social studies. But this document really does start to talk more globally about how, like the pedagogical approach of this, right? Which I really, really like. And I think it's the conversation that we're going to eventually have today. So, right, how to broadly approach what's our vision, what's our intent. So obviously I have some other thoughts about it, but I think that this is a really helpful place to start tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do think as far as where to get those thoughts, if we have time at the end, maybe we come back or if you wouldn't mind like shooting an email or voice text or something, because I think we are like right in the middle of tuning all this. So, and we'll bring it back again to this committee before we vote it to board. So there's another chance there, but just, reach out to if you're thinking about it and want to say more.
I have a question here, Melly, on the C, on the provide windows to understand the experience of others. So I try to make a sense. One is related to different curriculum. It's like we are bringing some Africanas or Wabanaki studies. I mean, the space then we're creating to understand some different experiences. I mean, that's going to be something is going to happen organically in the classroom so. I just want to get a sense how we see that providing windows to understand the experience. What kind of context that particular C will be put in place?
I mean, again, anyone on the team can speak about this. I think there are some really obvious, concrete places where we do that in some of the social studies work. But once again, I think speaking a little bit to what you shared, Roberta, about like these are sort of broadly applicable. I think that this comes out, and it's connected in my mind to the assets-based approach, even like in math, in terms of when we talk about there's multiple ways to find the right answer, and we facilitate classrooms that like sort of start with understanding where students' strengths and instincts are and where they facilitate dialogue with each other about how they're coming to their answers and why they got there. So I think it even talks about the history piece. And I think that's where, we're learning about different cultures and perspectives, but it's also about this idea that we all bring strengths and understanding to the table and we're learning from each other. And there's not like a single right way to go about things or do things or learn things. That's being kind of expressed in C as well. But anyone want to, from the team, elaborate or share a different example?
I can share that, currently we're developing our literacy for equity vision. And one of the big elements of that is windows and mirrors. And so one of the plans is once that's sort of in place, next year we'll do what we're thinking of as sort of an equity audit of the novels and anchor texts that we use across the system to see if we are reflecting both people that are outside of our community, but also, cultural heritage of people within our community. So I'm excited about that work for probably next year, but maybe in the next few years.
Oh, okay. I see now. Okay. All right. Yeah. That's a good example. Yes. Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you.
I don't know, Adam, if it's you or me calling on folks, but Roberto, do you want to jump in? I see your hand.
Okay. Yep.
I couldn't resist. Sorry. So actually on that one, on C, and I'm not entirely sure where the windows and mirror language comes from. So I might hope I'm not misinterpreting what mirror, particularly the mirrored part. So as I said before, like I like to avoid the piecemealing part of correcting our curriculum. And when we talk about decolonizing it, I think that's for me personally has a really purposeful use, right? The word, because like in social studies and in history, if we were to try to piecemeal it, right, and start to teach all of the all the historical facts and instances to explain colonization, then eventually we're going to miss so much of it, right? Because there's just too much to cover. But if we cover the ideal of colonialism, then we do find the mirrors, right? We find where we intersect. So one quick little personal story. Here in this community in Portland, I've had the great privilege of working alongside many leaders in our immigrant community. And more than once, I've had people approach me saying, and I think this is incredibly well intended, so I don't mean this in a bad way, but they say, "Oh, Roberto, we know you're Puerto Rican, but to us, you're also an immigrant." And I know that that's meant in a way to connect, but that's also really quickly erasing my reality as a non-immigrant Spanish speaker or dual language speaker in this country, right? As a migrant in this country. So I think what they meant to say is the effects of colonialism in our home countries is what connects us and what has those then mirrors in our experiences. And so if we were to then teach, the ideas of colonialism and that broad impact, we find the connections of it. But if you were to teach, for example, Puerto Rican history or some other specific Native history, you'd probably be missing that connection between all these people. So that's where I find that letter C, where I would kind of go when I read that. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
That was beautifully put. Hopefully you got that, Lindsay. And I do think once we look at the social studies vision, it'll be great to see how that lands with you in terms of where that's going, because I think it will resonate with what you're saying. But that will be a place to pick that piece up too. I'm sure you'll have feedback too to make it better. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this before we move forward?
Two, I think, brief comments just so you can track where I'm at. Yeah. The two things that I'm wondering about. One is this, well, I understand the intention. Will it get us to a place where we're not creating an assimilationist system where we're saying all students will thrive within a culture of whiteness, right? When I see the thrive in academic programs, I see the ways in which we're trying to push past that. And then the other, we've referenced Paulo Freire a few times in other conversations, and I'm wondering where the why and the root in liberation is here. It's not loud and clear to me.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Thank you. I'm taking that as feedback unless anybody else from the team.
Yeah, just conversation, not trying to solicit anything in particular.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else before I'm trying to scan you all? Okay. I'm going to keep going and feel free to interrupt me if I'm not seeing you. All right. So then in alignment with our equity goal and policy that's, being developed, this is just a little bit more context to get your minds going on how do we talk with our community about this. So this is more on the why, kind of where we're going from and to. So on this left-hand side, this is the from, so where we've been. And then on the right-hand side, this is the to, where we're going. And the to, just to be totally clear, is not like the ultimate to. This is like the known things that are works in progress that are connected to this practical workshop we're trying to have around, like, how do we start talking with people about the practical, tangible things that are currently happening and about to happen. So I just want to be clear about that for those of you who are wanting to see something more radical and profound in the two. This is not the sort of 5-10 year vision. This is the like work underway that we need to start thinking about how we talk about with our community. And so with that kind of framing in mind, so going from a system where we did have common graduation standards, but no common scope or sequence, meaning that we had the final standards, but no common documents that would help people know kind of how the learning progresses over time, which is why students' experiences were that they might get a topic or some content many times and other students might never see it. So a lot of autonomy at the school and teacher level, meaning that there isn't necessarily a deliberate or coherent progression of learning from one grade to the next, or one teacher to the next. Limited common curriculum tools. So we had 2 different math programs at the elementary level, a teacher's college model, a pre-K curriculum, and some intervention programs. No common curriculum at the middle school level. And then I think just the advanced placement seems to be the common piece at the high school level. As a general practice, literacy taught in isolation, so an ELA class and ELA block, and then a real practice of pulling students out, especially special education and English language learners, with optional or inconsistent collaboration with ELL and special ed, meaning that teachers who were interested would collaborate, but not necessarily a consistent and pervasive expectation and structure where that's a common expectation that happens with all classroom and content teachers. And so some of the moves we're trying to make in terms of where we're going right now are moving, with the graduation standards to also not just having standards, but these sort of broader statements of common belief and practice that I mentioned. We're going to be working on the portrait of a graduate. So not just the sort of graduation policy, but like, what do we really want to be true about a student who's graduating from our system? And then how do we back that out into, therefore, what are the things we're looking for to know that we're preparing and empowering them for high school at the 8th grade level? And therefore, what are we looking for at the 5th grade level to know that students are moving into middle school prepared and empowered? The content area visions that I mentioned are works in progress, where again, we're trying to really articulate a deeper kind of shared vision for pedagogy content and how learning progresses over time so that students have some consistent things that they learn and experiences they have throughout the system. Moving toward more common curriculum tools that are aligned with the visions. We don't imagine that all content and grade level have something like an illustrative math program at all, but we are looking at when we create these visions, what are the kinds of tools that are aligned to them that would be supportive of teachers and making choices about when we want to pursue common tools versus have teachers create things autonomously. In everything, teachers are a part of the process, the creative process. Moving toward a more comprehensive assessment strategy, pre-K through 12. We've talked about this as a board recently, especially when we had that access conversation that emphasizes formative tools. Formative tools means the kind of information that helps a teacher understand, are kids learning what I taught? And if not, like what's going on and what might I do next? Moving toward a more interdisciplinary orientation and integrating literacy into content. And so making space for things like science and social studies in elementary because we can teach literacy through the content areas. And then more of an orientation toward inclusion where, like we mentioned with that ELL example, students are all given access to the core instructional experiences. And that we're making the appropriate supports and accommodations to help all learners access that core curriculum with a common expectation that all teachers are collaborating with ELL and special ed in order to, and all teachers are responsible for all learners. And so those experts are there to help teachers figure out how to make the work and learning accessible to all of their students. So that's not an optional thing for those that are interested. That's something that we do as a common culture and practice. Oopsie, trying to move sorry. Oh boy, got my, Yeah. Okay. I got it. So this right hand, I guess, as I'm looking at it on the screen, these are getting a little bit more concrete. And I have one more slide that kind of keeps going practical in terms of the things that are happening that, again, are going to be things that the community and parents might start to see then in terms of what students are doing and have wonderings about. So just trying to make this transparent for you all in terms of what work is happening right now and why and where it's coming from in relationship to our bigger goals. I guess it might be helpful to pause here if folks have any questions, just to make sure you understand that what I just shared.
Roberto or Mickey, any questions or comments?
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay. And then here are some of the key moves. This is just kind of concretely. So things that are happening that people might want to know about. And we've heard some pushback on some of these: proficiency-based learning, our problem-based math curriculum, and detracking math. Social studies curriculum development. So the Wabanaki and Africana studies as our starting points. A move toward teaching elementary science with literacy integrated. So literacy taught through the science. The adoption and implementation of a systematic phonics program at the early grades. This assessment strategy that will result in some probably more common either tools or practices. Work underway around early childhood integration. So rather than having pre-K live separately, looking at the pre-K1, K1 together. Outdoor learning, the LAU plan implementation, a move toward more differentiation inclusion, and the work we're doing around coherent special education continuums of service. We've done BREAThe, we're trying to do BEACH, and continuing on that path. So it's just another way to sort of call out for you all a bunch of things that are underway and happening that we haven't talked about with families in the community much outside of like maybe board workshops and updates, but that's like our primary vehicle for communication at this point around this work.
I have a question there.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just at the top, you said you hear pushback. So I'm just curious, can you say more? Where's the pushback, even just at like a stakeholder group level? And like, what are you hearing? And I would be interested. Do you understand what the needs are of the folks that you're hearing pushback from?
So, well, the three things that stand out the most are proficiency-based learning. We haven't heard a lot of that recently, but there was loud pushback around that when we were trying to land our graduation and specifically grading policy expectations. And in my experience, it tended to be parents who had students in like advanced placement courses that were competing for competitive four-year college slots. And so the concern was about this model would somehow undermine their chances of getting into a competitive college and or getting an academic scholarship. At the time, we did things with public affairs, like we had a grading workshop with a panels from different colleges, including like really competitive four-year colleges, to sort of say to folks that that's not true. We have, of course, the example of Casco Bay in our midst, as you know, a high school with really awesome outcomes, who's done this model for a decade, but not sure that moved folks. And ultimately, where we're at in our policy is, you know, a little bit of a watered down version, frankly, of a true competency-based learning model. But so that's one. Another one is around math tracking, detracking. And the pushback we've heard so far is really from families who have kids that are in like the 8th grade algebra. So again, the sort of students who are in the advanced track, and you've got several people here who can speak to that and the research behind why that doesn't make sense sort of for all kids, not just, you know, the kids that are flying through these classes. But in any case, we've started to get some pushback there. And those are the families that are concerned about it. And just to be clear, King has always had heterogeneous grouped math. Lincoln this year for the first time, right, Carly, has taken a step away from that, and next year more will stop doing that as well. So that's fresh. And then the third example I would say is around the social studies curriculum. And so an example would be, we had some of these emails up to share with you, so this is a good time. Here's an example. I will preface my note by thanking you for doing a great job with handling COVID, so etc. This note concern has been brewing for quite some time in our household. I apologize for the untimely send, given what you're burdened with now. Simply put, and to keep it short for this note, our household is simply exhausted with Africa and learning about Africa, and I demand a change of course for our children. Our children should be taught new thriving technology from Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, US, and other countries versus a culture that has been dying for many decades and continues to decline. Assuming you both have children, and if so, I would trust that you would want your children on the front edge of things versus expending time, useless time, on filling them with data that will not help them move forward. I recognize that we have a recent influx of their culture into our New England culture, but enough is enough. On many occasions, we get complaints from our children that the curriculum is mostly African-based, music, language, etc., and the school is pushing mostly African-based topics. This is unacceptable. America and the world is more than Africans and their culture who have moved to Portland, Maine, or the United States. We can dig into this more. So does that give you? So this is what we're, yeah.
Yeah, so you have one category of folks where it's, we're used to an assurance that my kid's doing well and exceeding, and what, or is exceptional in some way, and how is this going to impact that, and wanting to know that my kid's going to turn out well. I get that. Yeah. And then that one's racist, right? And so that's a new influx of what we're hearing related to a specific change. So got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking kind of how you're reflecting that back, because that's obviously moving us toward this workshop, right, of who are we, like the audience we're speaking to and their motivations. And so, yes, absolutely.
I might add, Malia, just that one more group that has sort of been the pushback is like, why Wabanaki studies and Africana studies? When is fill in the blank group? When is that coming? Or why not this other group? Why this group over this?
Yeah.
And can I jump on that? And I think, Fiona, if you don't remember, I think I shared last time we had a focus group. And I think that's exactly what how we compare about humanity, why we really start making sense. Because when we just read on the email, I see where they're coming from, is that the way people being portray Africans, that's exactly what they want to hear. I mean, everything is nothing that they want to know about the humanity really starts in Africa. What's the foundation? What's the root of that? And I think for people to make sure, okay, this is something new, then my child will get there. I mean, how we make sure then we compare, and I think I shared that last time, what the European came here by boat as a refugee to find the better opportunities. And then, why we have to study the Wabanaki, because that land belonged to them. So, I mean, it's something that people need to see, because sometimes when I read those kind of email, I just see when people been asking me that question, okay, how did you come to America? Did you swim? Do you live in the jungle? Or, are you coming from Africa? I say, Africa is a continent, it's not a country. So, I mean, this is kind of people that we read in the email, like say, okay, they just don't want to hear about Africa. But Africa is a continent. I mean, there's a lot of things happening there. Like you have some country in the European. So, I mean, we really need to make sure the way we're breaking down those knowledge and education in our curriculum to give value about the Wabanaki study and African study, because it's going to be diminished. It's going to be downsizing, just to try to feel better. Then, those people, they value, the culture value doesn't mean anything for some of our families, because that's the way it is. That's racism right there. So, I mean, are we bringing that one to a different level? Then you know what? humanity really start there. And people, whether they like or not, that's the way to bring it. So that's why I say we need to really stay away from the British aspect of the Black humanity. That's exactly why most of the people here is going to reflect on that. So that's something that I want us to emphasize, because there's going to be a lot of pushback. And I know then that's exactly why we pick Wabanaki, why we pick Africans. Mm-hmm. So we just need to be ready to have the right message and how we break down that complexity of knowledge. Then you need to show people then, okay, you have to learn about it, because that's the reality. What you know is not, it's just a single story. Then your own ear and your own culture and your own mentality want to accept it. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. It's so difficult. Sometimes it's so frustrating, but but we have to speak about it. Yes.
Yeah. Roberto, did you want to jump in? And then I was just about to tee up our process for kind of getting into how we want to go into it, but yeah.
I'll be really quick. I just wanted to say, so as far as when we get emails and communications like that, and particularly for staff, as a reminder, when you communicate recommendations to the board, unlike other elected officials, our responsibility, which is guided by the state legislature, is directly to the students. So as much as we appreciate those sentiments and hearing from community members, our responsibility ultimately comes to taking action on what's in the best interest of our students, not necessarily pleasing the sentiments of constituents. And I say that because if we were to survey people into what they think or feel is in the best interest of students, it's very different than what research and data driven decisions takes us. And so we know what we're doing, and we know the intent with which we're doing it. And so appreciate the emails. But, that's a side note. Thank you.
Well, and I think that it's a great segue into the conversation about communication in terms of, well, what do we think we should be communicating to which audiences and in what ways? And I agree. And I think for me or Javier, someone I think we might have an easier time responding to apparently, we can talk with each other and whatnot, but I think part of this too is helping teachers know that they are supported and have the backing of us and the board with parents. Cause I think it's very difficult for teachers when they are receiving this kind of an email or this kind of a pushback and having to manage that and not necessarily feeling like there is support behind them. So there's another piece, which is when the board is supportive of the equity moves we're trying to make as they manifest through curriculum and instruction, it means it helps pave the way for the work to happen and for the kind of experts on the ground to focus on the work and not defending the work. And so I think that's just a perspective I bring to sort of our conversation at the board level about what's the role you all can play in supporting the sort of change management process with the broader community and family stakeholder group. So let me share my screen one last time for the discussion prompts if they help us. So a proposal we had, it was that we might talk about a few concrete examples. We can ditch this proposal if you want. The reason for it was feeling like it might, by unpacking a couple examples, there will be themes, right? About kind of both approach and key messages. So we thought it might get us kind of more concrete in terms of how do we want to think about the purpose, intent, and approach to messaging to the community. So we might talk about a couple and then pull back out and ask ourselves broadly, what's the strategy? So that's a proposal. And if you guys would prefer more of a global discussion, that's okay too, but that's what we had discussed. And that's why you have some math people here and Fiona here with us. And then in terms of, we were going to do smaller groups, but we'll stay together because we're A, a small group, and B, we can't technologically do smaller groups. But the prompts we were going to have for each of those topics were what are the key ideas families in the community need to understand about the instructional moves we're making? What do we anticipate are the fears and concerns people will have about the changes we are undertaking? What messages do we want to send, and what methods should we use to bring people along? And so you all have access to this PowerPoint too, and I'm going to put it in the chat just in case you want to pull it up to have those questions in front of you. But I guess, what time? We go till 7:30. Okay. So we have a half an hour left. So would you all like to start with one of these examples and sort of process through these questions with an example? And now I'm asking, Nikki, Adam, and Roberto, or would you prefer to look at those discussion prompts in more of a global way, given sort of the big picture context that I just shared?
I'm personally currently in the big picture frame, speaking for myself, Mickey and Roberto.
Myself too. I want the global big picture of the frame.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, Mr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, we'll go big picture.
Okay. So I think that our discussion, then if we start big picture, we'll probably toggle back and forth between that and then how these concrete examples play out. But I still think our discussion prompts work in terms of an entry point for the conversation. So, maybe we can just start with the first one. And Lindsay, if you can take some furious notes, that'd be awesome. But I guess, starting with what are the key ideas families in the community need to understand about the instructional moves that you're making? Maybe we can kind of open it up there. I think this is a dialogue for board members, Adam, Mickey, and Roberto, but I think if you guys are comfortable, rather than just fishbowling you, we want to make sure we're hearing your voices, but the team can maybe build on and chime in as well. Is that okay for you all? By the team, I mean staff, like the people that are here. Okay. I can't tell, Adam, what your response is.
I'm good. I got a little confused about who you were directing your "is that okay" to. So
I was staring at you and you were just stone-faced at me. I was like, what does that mean?
And how would I know you're staring at me?
Great point. So you can't see that. Okay. So team, this is really for board to kind of be generative, but chime in to help move the conversation along, of course. So would love to hear your thoughts. What are the key ideas families in the community need to understand about the instructional moves that we're making?
I mean, it's what you started us off with, right? Like, this is rooted in equity, why this is better for all kids, and then including their kids, particularly if we're talking about white middle-class families like mine. And you address this as well, like why this is like modern learning best practice anyway, too. Like those two things are what come up for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think the inclusion is not like, I think just going to make sense that when we're talking about African country, when we talk about African study, Africana study, or Wabanaki study, is now then we speaking directly for that. I think the inclusion should be more emphasizing on that, what we want our children to get from that. I mean, the outcomes for our children culture, for the generation to come. This is why we want to change to happen. I mean, I just, like example, when I went to school, I learned about America. I learned about European. So I know most of the culture, but when you go into American culture, is just you just know barely about the global world around you. So that means, are we changing that? So the inclusion is that about the people that we're living with, and then how we incorporate those cultures. It's not just, appreciate them, but we need to be able to accept, because the change is happening. So are we moving the inclusion to a more acceptable way by bringing some knowledge from the global aspects of the humanity? It's not only one specific one. And I think that's the way we really need to define our inclusion. Then we try to decolonize I have to say that decolonization of the curriculum is because of that. Mm-hmm. That we don't stay on one single story. We need to have the whole story. So this is exactly what the inclusion means. The whole story needs to be taught, and the truth of that story needs to be taught. So that means we have to move to that direction. So I really want to emphasize about the inclusion, because that's exactly what you're going to have a lot of pushback. You know.
Can I just pick up off Mickey's point, and so we can grab this? But when you're talking about that, we need to speak to the outcome and like what are we trying, like the why and like what are we trying? It's making me think about that portrait of a grad idea that we want to pick up. We were going to do this year and we didn't. So I just am naming that because that can be a process that has more transparency with the community, because sometimes it's hard for us to figure out like at what level of detail are we trying to communicate this information. I mean, you can get Tracy going on why you shouldn't track math. And like, I love it. I could sit all day with that, but like, you know, putting that into 2 bullets that people internalize is tricky. But anyway, Mickey, your comment about like, we need to focus on what's the outcome we want in terms of our students and what they learn. I think that portrait of a grad is a great opportunity for us to think about as a committee in terms of it's a great bridger between what we're trying to accomplish internally and get aligned around, but also what we're trying to express to families is our, you know, what we're going for here. You know,
that's right. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, the thing is going to be something that we need to sell. We really need to sell and sell it right, because of the context that we are living now. I mean, Portland with 95% white and families here. So are they going to accept it? Most of them, they are so proactive and progressive to see, okay, this is exactly what's the world. Because when I read, and Africa is not declining, Europeans are declining. So that means how the switch, that's the thing that mentality need to be changed. So that means are we bringing the outcomes for the future? So I mean, that's exactly why we need to make sure that the language is bringing that complexity of knowledge. Try to break down the complexity of the language that we had from the past, and how we're building the outcomes for our students for the future. Because those are students, they are more open, and they have the hunger to learn. And then I think this is the opportunity to give them exactly the right stories so they can move to the right direction for change.
Yeah, as a Euro-American, you know, when I've been at TED and I've been at the World Economic Forum, my disadvantage was quickly apparent in my ignorance in what I didn't understand about the world, particularly about Africa, right? Like, Africa is not anything that was described. First of all, like it's been said, it's a continent, it's not a country, but it is a thriving powerhouse in the world, and the future is in Africa in terms of technology, economies, all sorts of things. And so if you just want to keep a capitalist perspective and an extractive one, if I was to be a successful international business person and I didn't understand Africa and the countries of Africa, I'm going to fail. So there's that angle as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right.
I don't know if this is helpful language, but I've been trying to use the not taking a tourist approach to global studies, because I feel like that's the other trap to fall into. Is there sort of is like a real tendency to go like very surface level, and it's just like a little tourist look at, you know, oh, there's a holiday, there's a food, there's a picture of somebody's clothing, and then moving on. And so I would like personally, and I don't know if this is too detailed, Malia, but like to get it into the community's mind that this is like more what Mickey and Adam are talking about, and not sort of like a tourist approach to global studies. Another way to say it, which this probably, I don't know if this one works better or worse, but sometimes I say that like, we're not trying to have like a buffet of like, oh, and then you get your, 2 weeks about China, and then your 2 weeks about here, and then moving on to here. But that about seeing these like as stories. And Roberto, you had talked about like colonization in the beginning, that if you understand that deeply, you don't have to know every example in the entire world, but if you have a few, like if you've studied colonization deeply, then you can generalize that out to other places and experiences. And that feels like, I don't know how to get the community to understand that, but I'm worried that it will come across as like superficial, like it's a small world Disney ride if we don't message it right.
Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. It's funny because I was going more, and I don't even remember doing this, but I was going, instead of a small world, I was going more like Epcot Center, where you can do the tour of the world. And I don't think I've done this, but I understand that you get to have like a different beer from every world, which is just a real wonderful world to learn cultural competency. Anyways, I was gonna say another way to approach this and communicating with the community as to why we're doing this and how we're doing this. We take like a restorative approach. This is part of acknowledging a pain or a suffering, and then the healing of that suffering. So we tell the community we're doing this because this is the process that takes. And guess what? We're all there's going to be a lot of pain throughout. You're going to feel like we're taking something away from you. These folks have felt like something has been taken away from us. At the end, we're all going to gain. So I think that's another way of framing the community conversation.
Grace, did you want to jump in?
I was also wondering, because whenever we name, places in terms of geography, I think that sometimes we lose people in that way, particularly certain ones. And in history, I was thinking that the themes are, what are the common themes of humanities that cuts across all continents in the world. So colonization and empire building is one, right? So that's one. There's also migration and settlement is another theme. So if you think of it in terms of themes and talk, the description will be using those language. I think that's another way to bring people together in terms of raising interest in, what the curriculum looks like. Social studies, in my mind, is an easier approach to, and it's an important one, particularly at this time. This is just so crucial to our students' identity development. So we may think about it in terms of their own racial and identity formation as well, because it's not taught. It's just so one-sided. So lots of cultures are canceled.
Yeah, can I emphasize what Grace just mentioned coming to my mind? And I think the team, when we just start with Wabanaki study, and we have Africana. So that means people cannot lose in their mind, and we have some other continent team, then will come out. So that means it's so difficult, then people cannot just reject it right now but without knowing that, okay, this is a start. And then we're going to have the European countries, we're going to have the Asian countries. So those Asian continents, those area of humanity is going to be across all continents. So that means, but the start is what we're living right now. So we have a slavery, then we have as a story here for two different populations, two different races here in America. Then we have to start by the land where we are. So that means it's just that, and I can see on the assessment strategies, that's why we really need to define, are we building strategy so people can understand that when we do those assessments is because we have the specific teams, because of the value what we're having right now and what we're facing as a country. But everything then for those student outcomes, we really need to build some strategy to get some teams around different continents as well.
Just a question I have for you. I put in here the social studies vision because it starts to express our orientation around that. I'm interested, I'm observing the fact that there's like this energy around social studies. And I'm curious about that in terms of sometimes I feel like that's the content that feels like the most, like Wabanaki and Africana studies feels, sometimes tangible, right? Like there's our students have told us they are not reflected in our curriculum in terms of their history and identity. And like, we're trying to change that. As I think about the approach to the community, it gets overwhelming in terms of like, so what, like, I guess I'm curious, like, do we start with that? But like things like the proficiency-based learning and detracking math, those things go deep, like there's something like it's right there. There's this content, but then there's this other whole pedagogical stuff that's about a whole other level of, change that is uncomfortable to people and what they're used to in a traditional United States education system that was designed, with an intent and purpose to sort students into who's management and who's workers. And so we're like trying to like do stuff. So proficiency-based learning, like detract, like those things are trying to reorient. And so that really gets at the heart also of a lot of the concern and pushback. So my question is like, I guess when we're trying to talk about all these moves we're making, like, are we talking about all of them at once? Are we trying to take piece by piece? Like, let's talk social studies, then let's talk. I think that's what feels hard for me, at least, is to know what's the first thing to say. How do we do it? Like, where are we? You see what I'm saying? Because like, it's so much bigger than the social studies content. When you look back at those 2 slides I shared before, and some of the more like deep stuff gets into more of those pedagogical things, not even just the content of what we're teaching. So sorry, I'm glad I see raised hands. I'll stop talking.
I think that, you and I have talked about it, how to make the language of proficiency sexy and understandable is the challenge for that. Even the language of detracking. So when you something, that something is taken away from you. So, right. So that is, that just, it doesn't feel inclusive. So there's something that about those languages, those words that are not inviting others. And I think that's one problem with that. But, I totally agree with you. In terms of, but I think that if we talk about it in terms of your connectedness to what the future of the world is, right? What your child's future is going to be in terms of, the workforce of tomorrow. I think those kinds of language will probably be attractive to parents.
That's super helpful. I think, Roberto, you were next, and then Jesse. Adam, sorry, we can both do that. People can just chime in.
Melia, thank you for pausing and kind of framing the rest of the discussion this way. I don't think that we have spent enough time talking about detracking. Certainly as a board, we've not. Interestingly, that was one of the very, very first issues that I talked with the superintendent when I came onto the board like 5 years ago, after having some like long, thoughtful conversations with Doris Santoro about this. So I'm sure where her input came from. And so anyways, I immediately sort of kind of went back to, I wonder how my comments about this being a restorative process would apply if I take social studies out of it and I just, put detracking. And I think it still does. It still works, right? Detracking has caused some harm. And so I think that still, And I just wanted to say, I think that we gravitate to using social studies as the example because social studies, and I wonder how, if you survey like community members, how they would describe what social studies encompasses. I think it's like a catch-all subject. So that's probably why we lay our examples under the social studies framework, but not because we're not counting the other pieces. Although, like I said, we do need to discuss the tracking more as a board. Those are my thoughts. But again, thank you for pausing that, and a really important place for us to acknowledge the purpose of what we're doing and the areas that we're trying to cover.
I guess Grace's comment about making proficiency sexy made me think about how do you make detracking sexy, and it just made me think about like the reason behind why it's good for people is that like because of the depth that Fiona and Mickey were talking about in social studies, right? Like going deep into particular like math concepts is so much better for students' understanding in terms of the coherence of math across, before you get to high school. It's really important to deeply understand the concepts in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it makes me think about the depth that we're talking about in history in terms of like those case studies. So that was just sort of a aha that I was having.
And I think if you think about it, for Deering, in terms of the language that they use that I like is, challenge by choice. There's the word challenge and then it's a choice. And, for their students to take on AP classes, they're not saying anything about detracking. They're not closing it down. It's open to everybody. You take the challenge yourself. So there is that opening, and more inclusive, I think.
I love Adam, just if folks haven't read, is putting some of his thoughts in the chat. And it's no wonder you were connected to doing TED Talks. Know a thing or two about, or what do you TEDx, or what is it called, Adam?
Well, I've run TEDx Dirigo for a decade. Yeah.
Yes. So you know how to do this stuff too. But I think that's helpful. And I was going to ask, just looking at our time, maybe we look at that, see if that sparks anything more about the message. And then it looks like you started to get into the methods, because I wanted to make sure to just talk a little bit about when and how as well. But I don't know if folks want to take a second to read what's in the chat.
That was some old stuff for me, wanting to be a good student and answer all the questions I received.
Mm-hmm. You must have grown up in a traditional United States system that was trying to sort and rank kids based on if they answered the question or not.
Always put something down as an answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From the TED Talk perspective, the device is a through line. What is the idea that you're trying to impart in your audience's mind? It's your thesis, and then you build your talk around that with an open and middle and close with pretty traditional storytelling devices. But what's the through line?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's we've been talking about that through line concept. It's an interesting, there are like multiple ways to think about that. And so the question is like, what's the through line that's like relevant to the community and parents? But for the curriculum team, we've been trying to figure out, we're looking at all these content area visions and noticing there's like certain through lines that are true in terms of what we're trying to do with instruction that have to do with like depth and assets-based orientation and stuff. But then I don't know, I liked what you put on here in terms of the messages. This is better for kids as learners, as college applicants, as adults, and it's the right thing to do.
Can I add something on that? Just
Yeah.
specific to math, there is the weirdest phenomenon is that parents will say, my kid should be taught the way I was taught. Give them the traditional curriculum. What is this crazy new math? It's fuzzy. It's weird. Why I could just teach them in 2 minutes to line it up and carry the one. What is all this? And then you say, how is math for you later on? And they say, oh, I hate math. and I have that conversation over and over with families. And they say, as soon as algebra came along, I was out. I didn't understand a thing. And they didn't understand a thing because they didn't understand the roots of it, which were arithmetic, right? So there's something very liberating with families when you start to say, that's why it's different. We want something better for your child than you had. And I'm thinking about that incredibly painful and racist email that we just heard, because I want something better for that person's child than that person had. Like that their worldview needs work, needs revision. But so is that scary for parents to hear? Like, wait, did I not get something good? And sometimes the answer is, yeah, actually, you had a really limited and narrow view given to you of what it means to do math, or what it means to be a citizen of the world, or what it means to learn history. And so it's just a careful but important conversation to have with families about why it looks different than what they had when they were kids.
We should book that response. That's a good one.
Yes.
For families. So that I'm thinking of different, messaging, right? So messages that come from a school leader, a teacher, and district leader. And so I think there are different ways to talk, but that would be a really easy response for teachers, because that is like, how is it for you? It's a question. It's an invitation. So I love that.
And I think it gets to like that there's then some grief for people, right? Around like there being changes and it not being familiar. They're sad about like their own loss of what they didn't get. And then that they're confused about how to help their kid. That has a sadness for many people probably to it. And that we can I think if we know that going into these conversations, we can be more intentional about making space for that, sense of loss that people have. Whether we agree with it politically or not, it's there, and to make some room for it feels important.
I keep thinking too about how not to, from my perspective, having judgment of people's experiences and how they came to them is not necessarily always helpful for bringing folks bridging. So I go back to this point Mickey started with which is the outcome. So I hear that in terms of for families, comparing to what they have. I mean, that's always present in people's minds, but there's also the world, Adam, to your point about the world is different. And in order to be successful in the world, you need different skills and understandings. That's why, and that comes back to old conversations we've had about the value proposition of Portland Public Schools. And where are you genuinely going to be prepared to be successful in career and life in Maine? And so anyway, I'm just having that thought about sort of how not to, at least as a district, place judgment on how other people's experiences and how they came to where they are. And people might disagree with me, but how do we help people see the future and where we're headed and what kids will get through these types of experiences? So with math, when I learn more about what I've learned from you all in terms of that depth of understanding and how that actually leads to more interesting careers that use math, and how math as a skill set and a problem solving orientation is so relevant with so many careers right now, then, that's compelling. People just don't know.
Yes, and I think I just to get something you just mentioned right now. I think Adam get it too when you mentioned about the global, and I think he was who just spoke. I think he's I didn't read the name because I'm here. Let me see. She just share. I will find you. Tracy, it was Tracy. There you go. Tracy just mentioned something, I get it right, is that, what are we moving our student to be just a US citizen, but to become a global citizen? And I think that's exactly why we're moving them. I give an example. The thing is what America need to understand is that, that's America, but the thing is we are building just the US citizen. So are we moving from elementary school, high school? I'm not talking about the high achievers. I mean, the college and university is more global aspect right there. But how we start preparing them to that younger age for them to become those global citizens. I grew up and I went to school, and that's all education I had it was to become a global citizen. So this is just when I came to the United States and I figured out we're building US citizen. And then for me to remove my children from them, I start teaching them the whole world, global world, the way I learned, for them to value what is outside of the United States. So to be more competitive on that global stage. So that means what we're doing now is just to moving to that transition for just a US citizen to be more global citizens, to be more competitive. And I like just what Tracy mentioned about it. Yeah.
Roberta, I think you had your hand up, and then I was going to offer a couple closing thoughts here, Adam, before we adjourn. If that's okay? All right.
Thank you. Just had a question. I hope this is not too sidetracky. When we talk about math, when we talk about financial literacy and those conversations, is that included in our math curriculum or pedagogy, or is that very separate of that? Is that more of a, I guess, is that related to this?
Well, catch-all. Who's the catch-all?
Right here, personal finance falls in, you guessed it, social studies. Yeah.
So, interestingly, so the way that we were describing math and the way that Tracy said, what was it like when you reach algebra? That was my experience. And so I struggled with it. And I was one of these people that, went to community college, and I was like, I got to take math. I don't know what to do. But I figured it out, I guess, barely. But later in life, I have really engaged in economics and the stock market, and I follow things like exponential moving averages and simple moving average, and it's wild. Like, I have no anxiety whatsoever about these things. But a decade ago, I would have been like, whoa, like way too many numbers, a graph. Thanks, but no thanks. But anyways, interestingly that we put that in social study and not with math, because that would totally, when you put a dollar sign next to a number, the anxiety, especially if it's a green number, the anxiety lowers quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Would you care to design a financial literacy program for the Portland Public Schools?
Malia heard my tidbit. I have this whole analogy, which I understand are not really helpful, about how a candlestick chart can be used to represent advancement of progressive and equitable policies in a school district.
Wow.
Woohoo!
Support and resistance, all about support and resistance.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I know we have just a few more minutes left. So, I mean, this has been awesome. As expected, I thought it would be more generative than sort of having clear closure, but I think it gives us a lot of, ideas for where we go next. I think perhaps because, so next month there's three things, the grad policy, which I think will be quick. We could come back and reflect back to you all some sort of notes and some proposed kind of actions from all of this, as a way to reflect back and sort of get feedback on that. And then I think thirdly, we might might be doing the final equity policy revision. I got to remember that, where we are with that. But I guess for today's conversation, maybe that would be, does that sound okay, that we come back and say, okay, of all of this, what are some concrete ideas we have for messages and methods? And that could be something, the academic team who's here along with Grace could talk about, and sort of see, okay, if we started and did these things, what do y'all think about that? And I did catch that point that I think Aura shared, that you named, Adam, about students and bringing them in. And just for y'all to know too, this is something that we're actively trying to figure out internally with teachers. So we are not great at internal communications generally, and that's a growth edge in terms of, especially for academics, and how we really bring everybody along internally. And so that's something, just for your awareness, to know that we're this same conversation is happening with how do we bring teachers along with this work. So just, in many ways, you guys are much more exposed to a lot of the thinking and the why and the evolution of it than many of our teachers are. So just for full transparency, that's something we're trying to work on as well. So this helps with that too, actually, when we think about our internal processes. Anything else anyone wants to say before we wrap it up?
I just have one question, and related to Sun School, we building out foundations and requests previously about getting into our thinking that will direct our design for summer and beyond. Is that something that think we'll see in this committee in time, or is it something that we'll attend to at the full board? Just sensitive to the meeting you just described as full for May, and then we're in June. I just feel like the board should be informed and
Yeah. The May 4th, I think Javier announced this at the last board meeting, but maybe not. Maybe it's just in my head. But yeah, May 4th is when we're doing a summer school update for this summer with the full board. I do think this committee, it might make sense to bring summer back to this committee in September for an after action reflection and looking toward the following summer, because what we're going to be able to do relative to the sort of ideal vision this summer is not going to come all the way there, because we haven't had much time since we knew what money we had. Meanwhile, also managing 75 versions of school. But we're seeing this year as a step in the direction, because we'll have the money next year too. So that could be cool to bring you all the data and to do some reflection next fall. But yes, we will do a full board update about where we're at May 4th.
That's great to hear. And then I would just say, thanks for this conversation. Thanks for setting it up the way you did. Thanks for everybody bringing their full selves, expertise, and everything into the conversation. It was a good one. Yeah.
Thank you. Agreed. All right, Adam, I think there's some formalities.
It's my turn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Do I have a second? All in favor? All right.
I'm going to vote on that too.
Good night.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you
for coming. All right. See y'all.